Hello everyone, I'm Technical Sergeant Charles Metz.
I'm Staff Sergeant Monica Howard.
We're with the Deployment Transition Center here at Ramstein Air Base. Now by trade, we're 4 Charlie mental health technicians. However, here at the DTC, we operate in the role as resiliency trainers. Now typically you would come through our program for a 4-day program. However, since you're unable to come through our program here at Ramstein, we're going to touch on our program virtually. So we'll be doing the virtual DTC or VTDTC. Now specifically, we're going to touch on 2 subject matters. The first of which being stress. Specifically, we're going to touch on stress in your deployed location and your transition going back home. We're also going to touch on the 4 CAF pillars, or Comprehensive Airman Fitness pillars. And again, we're going to touch on the pillars associated with your deployment and your transition going back home. Without further ado, I'm going to turn it over to Sergeant Howard.
Thank you, Sergeant. All right, so before we get started, I want to let you guys know that stress looks different to everyone, and I want to pose 3 questions to you. Your personal definition of stress, how do you know when you're stressed, and what does stress feel like to you? So go around the room or reflect personally on those 3 questions. Welcome back. Hopefully you guys had some good discussion on the 3 questions that I asked you. So what you're looking at here is called the Yerkes-Dodson curve. So what this curve is showing you, on one axis is performance and ability, and on the bottom axis is stress, challenge, or arousal, however you want to look at it. So what you're looking at here is, on one end you have low performance, and with that low performance you have low motivation, lack of focus, and boredom. On the opposite end of that you have distress, panic, which leads to panic, burnout, and loss of control. And in the middle, what you have is eustress. So that's the ideal balance, rational thinking, focused attention, and emotional balance. Looking at the curve, if you have times of low stress, you're going to be in this calm, kind of chill mind frame. On the opposite end of that, if you have this high ops tempo, busy work center, long hours, you're going to be on that distress end. Here in the middle is the optimal range, again what we call eustress, which is ideal. What are some examples of eustress and distress that you personally have? Go around the room or reflect personally.
Welcome back everyone. Hopefully you got some good responses and good conversation on what positive and negative stress looked like to you. Now I'm going to touch on 2 terms. The first is post-traumatic stress disorder, also known as PTSD, and then PTG, which is post-traumatic growth. Now I know most of you probably know a little bit about PTSD. Some of you may not know as much about post-traumatic growth. So before we go and elaborate on those 2 terms, I want you to go around the room and or reflect personally on what you think PTSD and post-traumatic growth looks like to you. Hopefully you had some good discussion on what you feel PTSD and PTG is. So I'm going to go over PTSD real quick. So some common terms or some common symptoms of PTSD that you may experience are avoidance, and specifically it'd be avoiding people, places, or conversations that remind you of that traumatic event. Also, loss of interest. So loss of interest in hobbies or activities that you were typically engaged in. So if you were an extrovert and you like fishing, camping, basketball, and then all of a sudden you're not doing that, you're closing yourself off. That would be an example of a loss of interest in activities that you'd normally be engaged in. Also, inability to feel emotions, and this is every emotion. So inability to feel sadness, inability to feel anger, happiness, just a complete loss of emotions. Some people call this emotional numbness. Also, feeling detached, so feeling like you're, again, isolated from everyone else, feeling like you don't have a sense of purpose or sense of belonging, as well as anxiety and nightmares. And again, those can range from person to person. Now, with traumatic events, it's important to realize that trauma or traumatic events can vary from person to person. It's not a set definition for everyone. So what may be traumatic to someone may not be traumatic to someone else. And that's okay. At the end of the day, we're all human. We all have our own individual emotions. Now with PTG, post-traumatic growth, it's a little different. It's where you may experience some of these emotions, but you're able to get to a point to where you're able to look back and grow and reflect on that traumatic experience. Whereas with PTSD, you kind of get stuck in that spiral. So post-traumatic growth is being able to look back, being able to grow from it. And kind of in the middle here, we have resiliency. And that's why we touch on resiliency a lot here at the DTC and in the Air Force in general, because really resiliency is what's going to be that bridge between PTSD and post-traumatic growth. Now, to further emphasize post-traumatic growth, I'm going to tell you a brief story. This story is about a young child who's outside playing. He finds a nice, cute, fuzzy caterpillar. He takes that caterpillar, he takes it back home. He's like, Mom, can we keep this caterpillar? Mom says yes. They take the caterpillar, they put him in a jar, get it all fancied up, leaves, stick. It's got a nice cushy home it's living in. The boy waits in anticipation for this caterpillar to blossom into this beautiful butterfly. Well, one day this caterpillar is acting a little different. It starts scooting up the stick a little bit, getting ready to cocoon up. He goes, Mom, why is this caterpillar acting weird? The mom explains this is a normal process. This caterpillar is about to cocoon into this beautiful, beautiful butterfly. The kid's like, okay. Some time passes, the caterpillar starts to cocoon. It's cocooned up. The boy, again, is waiting in anticipation for this butterfly to bloom out. At one point, a hole is seen on the cocoon. He can see the caterpillar, butterfly, maybe it's both, maybe it's a butterfly, maybe it's still a caterpillar, who knows. He sees it start to struggle, the cocoon's shaking. Well, why isn't the caterpillar coming out of the cocoon yet? The hole isn't growing. He feels the caterpillar is struggling. The mom tells him to wait. Nope, it's just part of the process. The kid grows impatient. He goes to grab a pair of scissors and he cuts the cocoon down to free the butterfly. The butterfly comes out, but instead of being this nice, beautiful butterfly, it's a swollen caterpillar with withered wings. Now the boy thinks that at some point this caterpillar's gonna bloom out. The wings are gonna grow, it's gonna grow stronger at some point. That never happens. This caterpillar stays grounded. Its wings never grow, it remains swollen. I give you this analogy because with post-traumatic growth, it's normal to go through the struggle, AKA getting out of the cocoon. It's not meant to be easy always, and that's okay. That struggle is what makes that butterfly blossom. When a caterpillar comes out of its cocoon, the struggle that it has, it pushes its fluids to the wings, and that's what makes it blossom, as opposed to being swollen up. So when you think about post-traumatic growth, know that it's normal to have some struggles. It's normal to get through those adverse times, and that's okay. It's part of the process. Don't rush it. Don't take shortcuts. Do what you need to do personally to make sure you go through the process the way it should go. Another analogy I want to hit on is the 1 degree rule, also known as the frog analogy. So what this is talking about is, let's say you have a pot of boiling water and you have a frog. If that frog jumps into the pot of boiling water, they're going to immediately react. They're going to go straight from a calm, lack of focus, straight to a sense of urgency, panic, and that de-stress category. So oftentimes when you're deployed, things may go from real calm, and then there may be an attack or an exercise that happens, and then you're immediately jumping in that distress category. That's not always a bad thing, especially in a deployed environment where you have to be vigilant, where you have to be hyper aware of what's going on. Then there's the 1 degree, where if you slowly increase the temperature 1 degree at a time, the frog may not necessarily react or realize what's going on, as opposed to jumping into it right when it's boiling. So if you slowly increase that degree 1 at a time, you're not going to get that immediate reaction. And that's where that bell curve comes into play that Sergeant Howard was touching on. When you go back home, you're going to have a lot more responsibilities. You're going to have new responsibilities that you didn't have in your deployed environment, such as simple things like paying bills, going grocery shopping, dealing with family, dealing with kids. So you're going to have that 1 degree at a time of things just continuously stacking up. You want to pay attention to those stressors. What you don't want to happen is where it slowly increases and then you're in the distress category before you realize what's happening. So with the 1 degree analogy, you want to keep in mind of duration, intensity, and frequency of those stressors. So with duration, you want to keep an eye on how long are these stressors going on for. Are they happening for a couple seconds, a couple minutes, a couple hours? You want to key in on the intensity. How intense are they? What are you experiencing? Are you experiencing anger? Are you experiencing anxiety, depression? You want to key in on what you're experiencing physically and emotionally. And lastly, frequency. How often are these occurring? Are they occurring every day, once a week, once a month? So with all the stressors that you experience, both on deployment and going back home, keep in mind duration, intensity, and frequency. Now, along with that is self-care. We talk about self-care a lot in the military. So oftentimes in leadership positions, and no matter what tier you're in, you're going to be in a leadership role. So Common thing that we hear is you have to take care of your people. And that's true, but you also have to take care of yourself. In other words, you can't take care of the people that you're in charge of if you're not taking care of yourself. So you have to make time for you. You have to find some things that work for you in stressful times. And that's where coping comes into play. So with coping, there's positive coping and negative coping. An example of a positive coping technique would be working out. That's a common one that people utilize on deployment. Working out, get their frustrations off, get their anxiety, get their anger off. An example of a negative coping mechanism would be self-medication. In other words, using substances or alcohol to quote unquote deal with what's going on. Because in reality, you're not actually dealing with it. That would be an example of a negative coping behavior. At this time, I want you to go around the room or reflect personally on what some examples of positive and negative coping behaviors are for you. Hello everyone, welcome back once again. So with everything we just touched on, again, I want you to take a key point away. And that key point is stress is inevitable, but it can lead to growth. So again, tying that term back to post-traumatic growth, that's what I want you to key in on. If you take anything away from this diagram, positive stress, negative stress, coping, any of the analogies that we brought about, really realize that stress is inevitable, but it can lead to growth. In addition to PTSD and post-traumatic growth, it's important to realize that you don't always have to start out with a disorder to go to post-traumatic growth. Really, ideally, what we're aiming for is you have some post-traumatic stress and you're able to get to that growth point without having it become a disorder. So again, just want to re-emphasize that it does not have to go from a disorder to post-traumatic growth. Ideally, you have a stressful situation and you're able to grow from it, learn from it, and get to that post-traumatic growth stage before it does become a disorder. Now, the next portion of what we're going to touch on are the 4 comprehensive airman fitness pillars, or the CAF pillars. Sergeant Howard is going to lead off with that portion, but before we get to that, I want you to first see if you can identify what the 4 CAF pillars are and why you think the 4 CAF pillars are important to you in the United States Air Force.
All right, so hopefully you were able to get what the 4 CAF pillars are. They are social, physical, mental, and spiritual. As we're going through, I want you to remember socially connected, physically energized, mentally focused, and spiritually aligned. Also, while we're going through, I want you to think about the CAF pillars as a table. A table has 4 legs. If one of those legs is off balance, the table isn't going to function properly. It's the same with the CAF pillars. If one of these areas is off balance, you're going to feel it throughout all the other ones, right? Another thing I want you to think about as we're going through filling out this chart is some of the things are going to fit in all of the areas. So, for example, the gym. The gym can be social, the gym can be physical, and the gym can be mental. Going into this, I want you to think about your missions while you were deployed, as well as your personal and professional goals. So some common ones we see here at the DTC for your mission are search and recovery and intel. And personal and professional goals, we see college and fitness. So right now, if you want to go around the room or reflect personally on what your mission and your personal and professional goals were in your deployed location. Hopefully you had some good discussion on what your mission was in your deployment and some personal and professional goals that you had. Now we're going to move into the social category. So again, social. How were you able to stay socially connected in your deployed location? Some common ones we see here in the DTC are movie nights. So that was your unit getting together a couple of times a week to watch movies or play games, anything like that. Something that can be negative in this social category is personal space. So your inability to have that personal space. You have a roommate, go to the gym is full, eating at the dining facility, you just don't have the opportunity to have that personal space. Something that can be both positive and negative is Wi-Fi. So the ability to stay connected to your friends and your family back home is great, but also on the other end is that constant connection and your family thinking that you can always be available if they need to talk to you, if they want to see you via Wi-Fi. So again, a positive and negative. If you want to go around the room or reflect personally on things that kept you socially connected in your deployment, or what are some obstacles that hindered your social connection?
All right, now that we touched on the social pillar of being socially connected, we're going to move straight into the physical pillar. So what kept you physically energized in your deployed location? Now, specifically, some examples that we're given here at the DTC are fitness. And this would be a positive. So some people say that they had a lot more time to work out in the deployed location. A negative that we often hear is the DFAC and food situation. So we've had some deployers say that they had chicken and rice all day, every day on a deployed location, and that can be rough for some people. Also encompassed in the physical tier are the 5 senses. So vision, hearing, smell, taste, touch. All 5 of those correlate with this category. Now, some common 5 senses that we hear here at the DTC are air quality is one of them. So if you're in an environment where there's a lot of dust or the smell is bad, that can be an example of a negative outlook for the physical tier. Another example was the plumbing. So we've had some deployers come through here talking about how the latrine facilities weren't really at Air Force standards. A lot of things getting backed up. Again, that can affect the smell. And then along with the food, some people complain about the internal plumbing issues they had downrange. So again, with the physical category, we're touching on all that. So at this time, please go around the room or reflect personally on what kept you physically energized or what was a hindrance to you being physically energized in your deployed location.
All right, so hopefully you got some good answers to ways that you were able to stay physically energized in your deployment. Now we're going to move into ways that you were able to stay mentally focused, or things that hindered you from being able to be mentally focused in your deployment. So some common things we see here at the DTC are reading. So people read to get out of their own heads, to escape for a little bit, right? To just have that ability to go somewhere else. Something that can be a negative is isolation, but this can also be a positive. So if you're using isolation to, again, get some of that personal space, some alone time, that's a good thing. But if you're using isolation as avoidance from work or from any of the responsibilities that you have or things going on in your head, that's where it can be a negative. So if you want to go around the room or reflect personally on ways that you were able to stay mentally focused or some obstacles that prevented you from being able to be mentally focused in your deployment.
All right, hello everyone. So we are moving on to the spiritual tier. Specifically, we're going to look at what kept you spiritually aligned in your deployed location. Now, there's a couple terms that I want to go over that are commonly used here in the spiritual tier. Now, when we talk about the spiritual pillar, we're talking religion and we're also talking about values. So religion is tied into this for those of you who are religious, but it also touches on your personal values, what you were brought up on, what you were raised with. Before we touch on these though, I want to start off with a quote from one of our chaplains here at the DTC. He said, "Everyone ends up somewhere, but few people, and I emphasize few people, end up somewhere on purpose." Take that one with you. Now, the first term, religion and philosophy. So we've had philosophy up here because, again, not everyone is religious. So some people found that this was very important to them in their deployed location. It was a way for them to escape. It was a way for them to focus on something outside of the mission operations. Another one was purpose. This can be both bad and good. So for some people, they get in a deployed environment and they have a renewed sense of purpose. They're part of the operational mission. They feel, reinvigorated, reblued. For other people, oftentimes people are redeployed to the same location twice. We had an example of a senior NCO who said he went to Afghanistan 10 years ago and then came back, went there just recently, and nothing had changed. So he actually had a lack of sense of purpose. He lost the idea of, what are we doing here? So that can be an impact for some people as well. At this point in time, I want you to go around the room or reflect personally on both some pros and some cons on what's kept you spiritually aligned in the deployed environment. All right, hopefully y'all had some good examples of both pros and cons of what kept you spiritually aligned in your deployed location. Also within this tier, there's a term that I want to hit on, and that's called moral injury. Now, oftentimes when people see the term injury, they think something physical. However, a moral injury is something internal. It's where you've gone against or done something against one of your own personal values or beliefs. Now, some common examples that we get here at the DTC are taking a life. So when you're brought up, when you're raised, you may have been raised to say that I will never take a life. I will never harm someone. I will never take someone's life. However, in the military, there are times where we either have to defend ourselves or defend our fellow wingmen or complete missions. That can be with a weapon, it can be with a UAV. At some point, you may have to take a life. That can be a huge internal conflict or struggle for some people. They're going against something that they were brought up and raised on. And yes, at the end of the day, we all signed a contract and we know that's something that can happen, but it doesn't change the fact that we're human and that we have those emotions inside of us, and that's okay. Another example, a little bit less on the extreme side, is honesty. So we've had some deployers who are in a deployed location and they're talking to their family on Skype or FaceTime, whatever it may be, and an exercise happens or an attack happens, and they have to end that conversation. Now, oftentimes they tell them, hey, I have to go real quick, I'm busy, I gotta get back to work. Very few times is someone gonna say, hey, we're being attacked right now, I need to leave. But that can be an internal conflict for someone. You know, they can feel like, oh my gosh, I just lied to my family members. They didn't do it out of maliciousness, they did it so that their family back home wouldn't worry or so that they wouldn't stress out. So those are just two examples of moral injuries. At this time, I want you to go around the room or reflect personally on some personal examples of anything that you've experienced as far as moral injury goes.
So hopefully you got some good discussion out of the spiritual side of your deployment. Now moving into your transition home, Sergeant Metz hit on that moral injury. So the question is, can war wound the soul, right? And in this transition home, we look at how do we heal it? How do we move forward? How do we move past the things that we saw, the things that you did, all of the things from your deployment? That comes into finding your purpose, which can be both a positive or negative thing. And then another thing we see here at the DTC is meditation. An example that I got from one of my TAC-P classes is reconnecting with their kids. That innocence that their kids bring, give them that ability to be spiritually aligned and find their purpose and stay connected. So if you want to go around the room or reflect personally on ways that you were able to stay spiritually aligned in your deployment or things that hindered you from being able to stay spiritually aligned.
All right, welcome back everyone. So now we're gonna be moving on to the mental tier of what's gonna keep you mentally focused when you go back home and or what could be a hindrance to your mental focus when you go back home. Now some common ones that we hear here at the DTC are hobbies. So getting back to hobbies, whether it's fishing, playing basketball, hanging out with family, hanging out with friends, whatever it may be, getting back to those activities that you were engaged with prior to deployment or finding new activities and hobbies. Responsibilities. Now we have this one as a pro and a con. Going back home, it can be a lot, especially with the addition of so many responsibilities. Again, like we touched on in the past, bills, family, kids, work environment, it can be a lot. However, for some people, a lot of people like having those additional responsibilities. So in a deployed location, we don't have much to worry about. Some people find it relaxing, reassuring. They find it more mentally focused for them when they go back home and they have a lot to do. So again, responsibilities can be both pro and a con. Lastly is hypervigilance. Now this is the key term I want to hit on. So as we touched on with the Yerkes-Dotson scale earlier, we talked about that bell curve. We talked about going from a calm environment straight to in that distress category. Whenever you go back home, how do you turn that off? Some people are still in that hyper-vigilant mode where something minor like a car backfiring may have them react in a reaction that they're not normally used to. Maybe prior to deployment, a car backfired and it maybe had you started a little bit, but maybe after deployment, it has you completely reacting. You're checking your 360 perimeter, maybe you pull your car over, it can have a whole new reaction, whole new meaning. So with hypervigilance, we want you to remain vigilant, but hypervigilant is taking it to excess. It's when it has a negative impact on your day-to-day functioning. So if you're at that point to where small things that normally wouldn't have you react are now having an impact on your social, your family, your work, just your normal day-to-day functioning, that's where hypervigilance is a negative, a con. So just something to keep aware of, something to keep an eye on when you go back home. At this moment in time, I want you to go around the room or reflect personally on some examples of what's going to keep you mentally focused and or what could be a hindrance to you being mentally focused when you go back home.
Hopefully you had some good discussion on ways that you're going to be mentally focused in your transition home. Now we're going to move into physical. Some things we see here at the DTC that are common are sleep. So you want to look at sleep as something that's really important because it affects both mentally and physically how you will respond when you get home. So that's something that's positive. Something that can be both positive and negative is your PT test. So you may have been in a location where you had that time to work out, establish a gym routine, go to the gym every day, and get ready for your PT test when you get home. On the opposite end of that, you could have been in a location where you had a high ops tempo, long work hours, and didn't have the ability or opportunity to go to the gym. So that's why PT test can also be a negative. So you want to look at, in that transition home, ways to establish new routines and prepare for those tests. 3 things I want to hit on that are going to be really important in your transition home are food. All right, so in your deployed location, you had limited food options, you ate at the DFAC mostly. You may have gotten care packages from home with food options, but generally speaking, your food was limited. So in this transition home, you want to think about creating a budget, making a shopping list, and not shopping while you're hungry. The next thing I want to hit on is alcohol. So when we talk about alcohol, some of you may have been able to drink in your deploy location, but most of you probably couldn't, right? So when we think about alcohol in your transition home, you want to look at tolerance. Tolerance meaning the way your body functions when you drink. So with this, you want to think of standard drink sizes. So that is, for beer, 12 ounces of beer of 5% alcohol. Wine is 5 ounces of 11 to 12% alcohol, and then you have liquor, 1.5 ounces or of 40% alcohol. With this, you also want to think about how your body metabolizes alcohol, which is 1.5 to 2 hours per drink. So again, those standard drink sizes, and 1.5 to 2 hours, it's going to take your body to metabolize that alcohol. Lastly, I want to talk about sex. So when we talk about sex, it's not just intercourse. This is intimacy as well. So hand holding, sitting next to someone on the couch, physical, emotional touch. The big thing with this is communication. You want to make sure that your needs are communicated, but also that you're getting the expectations and communication from your spouse or significant other or partner when it comes to sex. Another big thing with sex is consent and safety. So again, making sure that you have communicated what it is that your expectations are, but you also get those expectations from your spouse or significant other or partner. So right now, if you want to go around the room or reflect personally on ways that you are going to be physically energized in your deployment or things that will hinder you from being able to be physically energized.
All right, welcome back everyone. Hopefully you had some good discussion on what's gonna get you physically energized when you go back home. Now we're gonna go to what's gonna keep you socially connected when you go back home. Now some common ones that we hear here at the DTC are family, kids, and or friends. So oftentimes with our deployers, they're usually really excited to get back to their family, get back to their friends, and in some cases they have kids, they're excited to get back to that routine. Now some negative situations that are brought up here at the DTC are routines. Specifically, routines at home and at work. Now, an example from some of our deployers here is coming back to new routines with their kids. So we had one deployer, before his deployment, he had a set routine for his daughter. You know, he would lay her down to go to sleep, nighttime story, goodnight, hug, kiss, and then he rolled out the room. When he got back, a new routine had been established. So in addition to this routine was she now wanted her special blanket with her. Well, he wasn't aware of this routine. So he did his normal routine that he had done prior to the deployment, and she freaked out. As soon as he shut the door, she started crying. Oh my gosh. So he of course felt a lot of guilt. It's important to realize that things may have changed while you're on deployment. New routines may have been established. So again, with that expectation management that we've been hitting on throughout the course of this presentation, realizing that life has gone on since the deployment. So having that communication, like Sergeant Howard hit on in previous lessons, communicating with spouse, communicating with your work center. You may be going to a brand new work center. You may have different coworkers. You may have new experiences. You may not be working in the same work section. So again, having that realization, having that expectation management. Another thing with social connectiveness is cognitive restructuring. So in some situations, you may go into a situation expecting it to be one way, and then it turns out to be something completely different. So when we talk about cognitive restructuring, we're talking about an 8-step process. The first one is to calm yourself. So if you find yourself in that situation where something is not what you expected, take a minute. Do some diaphragmatic deep breathing. 7 seconds in, 7 seconds out. Take a moment to collect yourself. The next one is identify the situation. So what was the situation that occurred that made you react the way you did? What was different? What made you expect one thing and something else happened? Then analyze your mood. What emotions are you feeling? How are you feeling at that moment in time? Then you're gonna roll into IDing your automatic thoughts. So what automatically popped in your head whenever that expectation that you were expecting to happen didn't happen? Next, you're gonna identify supporting evidence for your argument. So if you're upset or angry, think about some supporting evidence as to why you are. Next, you're gonna do the opposite of that. You're gonna identify contradictions to that evidence. So I shouldn't feel this way because of this, or I should feel this way because of this. Also, you're gonna ID fair and balanced thoughts. And then you're gonna look at your mood at that point in time. So once you've gone through this 8-step process, at the very end, you're gonna go back to looking at your mood now, how you're feeling at that moment in time, and then you're gonna look at the way forward. How are you gonna progress? How are you gonna get to a point to when something doesn't work out the way you're expected, you're able to move forward, you're able to go past that. At this moment in time, I want you to go around the room and reflect personally on how you plan on maintaining or strengthening your social connections when you return home, as well as do you foresee any obstacles to achieving your social resiliency goals. All right, we are nearing the end, everyone. Now we're gonna move on to what is gonna be your mission when you go back home, as well as your personal and professional goals. Now, some of the examples that we hear here at the DTC are PCSing and a new job for a mission. So you may be going back to a new assignment, new coworkers, like we touched on that last category. For personal and professional goals, some common ones we hear are family, PME, and promotion. So reconnecting with family, that can be a large goal for some people. And then for other people, it's promotion, PME, advancing in their careers. At this moment in time, I want you to go around the room or reflect personally. What is your mission when you return home? And what are some of your personal and professional goals once you return home?
Hopefully you were able to come up with some good personal and professional goals and missions for your transition home. Now we want to hit on some resources. The first resource you have available to you is the chaplain. The chaplain is the only mental health type entity that has 100% confidentiality. That also extends to the religious affairs airmen as well. So if you go to the chapel and you run into one of the airmen there, they also have that 100% confidentiality. The next 3 resources I'm going to talk to you about, they have the same limits to confidentiality. So suicidal ideation, homicidal ideation, general fitness for duty, and UCMJ violations. So the first of those is the MFLAC, or the Military Family Life Consultant. They are an entity of the Airman Family Readiness Center. So if you go see them, they will meet you almost anywhere on or off base, 24/7. They just won't meet you at your home. They do couples counseling, individual counseling. There are child MFLACs at some bases. The next resource you have available to you is the Behavioral Health Optimization Clinic, or BHOP. BHOP is an entity of the Family Practice Clinic, and they work closely with your PCM. So just like if you would go to your PCM for a shoulder injury, they will help you treat that one thing. So it's the same thing if you go see BHOP. You take one issue like depression or anxiety, they'll help you find coping skills and treat that one issue. You'll go back for another singular issue. To BHOP and their providers, they're usually civilians, and if you take an issue to them, their first line of defense is to go back to your PCM, and then they decide the course of action from there. The next resource you have available to you is the mental health clinic. The mental health clinic has 3 elements: family advocacy, ADAPT, and mental health. So with the family advocacy program, you go there for maltreatment services and also preventative services. So when you get home, if there are any issues with you and your spouse in communication, you can go to the family advocacy clinic. They also offer the new parent support program. They have a nurse who will come out and help you from the time that you find out you're pregnant to your child turning 3 years old. And they do developmental skills, making sure your child is where they need to be, and lactation consulting, different things like that. Also with family advocacy, they do a Dad's 101 class. So if you're a new dad and you want to learn how to put on a diaper, how to feed your child, that's also a really good resource. Also within the mental health clinic, you have the ADAPT program, or Alcohol, Drug Abuse Prevention and Treatment. So when you return from your deployment, if you feel like you're using alcohol to cope with issues, or you feel like there's any issues with alcohol, it's better if you self-refer to the ADAPT clinic than if you're command referred. Lastly, within the mental health element, you have the actual mental health clinic. They are an all-encompassing service. So if you're having issues communicating with your spouse, you're having depression or anxiety-like symptoms, that's where you take all of those issues simultaneously to the mental health clinic, and they will help you solve that at the same time.
Additionally, on the resources list, we have the SARC, or the Sexual Response Coordinator. So if you have any instances of any sexual assault, you can go through that coordinator. As well as the AFRC, so the Airman and Family Readiness Center. So as Sergeant Howard hit on with the MFLAC, typically the MFLACs are located in the Airman and Family Readiness Center, and they offer a plethora of resources such as taxes, counseling, financial management. There's also the Military One Source. Now, the great thing about Military One Source is, again, it has multiple resources, but let's say you want a specific provider, a female provider who's faith-based. You can go through Military One Source and they can get you linked up with that specific provider. For your Guard and Reserve units, for the Guard, you have an AFRC program manager that you can utilize and go through for your additional resources. And for the Reserve components have most of the same resources that active duty have. Specifically, they'll have access to the chaplains and the mental health AGRs.
With all the resources that are available to you, like Sergeant Metz and I just let you know, I want to remind you that this can be a normal response to an abnormal situation. Not everyone deploys. No one really knows what you went through on your deployment. You know, that's decided by you. So again, it's a normal response to an abnormal situation. All right, now we want to look at your transition home a little more. So we want to look at your transition as if you're like a smart car, right? So that is being able to get home, you're turning on a dime, you're fitting right back into your family life, your friends, your work center, everything moves quickly. The next thing is getting home like a mid-size sedan on that 2-lane road. It's gonna take a couple times to get around. You may need a little help, but you're gonna get there eventually. It's gonna take a little time for you to fit back in again to those family, friends, and work center. Or you could be like that 18-wheeler on the 2-lane road. It's gonna take a lot of times to come around, a lot of pivots. You may need a spotter, but eventually you are gonna make it around, right? This is where you might need to take a knee and say, hey, what are my resources? What do I have available to me? And those, again, are the resources that we just pointed out to you.
All right, so in conclusion, just want to recap on some of the material that we touched on today. So we started off talking about stress. Specifically, Sergeant Howard hit on the calm, eustress, de-stress. We also touched on post-traumatic growth as well as post-traumatic stress disorder. Then we moved on to the 4 CAF pillars, comprehensive airman fitness pillars, specifically tying in that transition from your deployed environment going back home. And throughout everything we touched on today is expectation management. So really harping on that key term, having that communication with those that you're going to be returning to back home, both at home and at work. At the very end, like Sergeant Howard hit on with the car analogies, It's best to treat whatever's going on with you initially while it's a smaller problem, as opposed to letting it fester and turn into something that gets out of control. An analogy that I like to use is a paper cut. So let's say you get a paper cut on your hand. It's a lot better to go ahead and treat, wash that wound, put some Neosporin on it, put a Band-Aid on it while it's something minor, while it's something small, as opposed to letting it fester and potentially getting infected. It's the same thing with your emotions. Don't wait until the last minute, until things have gotten worse, to seek help. Lastly, I want to thank you for your service. We appreciate the time that you put in at your deployment. We appreciate not only your sacrifice, but the sacrifice of the loved ones back home, whether it's your family, friends, spouses. We really do appreciate it. And we hope that you were able to take away some good bits of information from our presentation. Thank you, and you have a good day.